I'm actually going to use brass tubing, 1/4 inch on the outside diameter. Okay, so this is going to be approximate length, or we need to have extra but not too much extra. So I've got a cheap little hacksaw here. Who doesn't have a hacksaw? Everybody has a hacksaw, right? So thin you actually kind of have to cut it on the backstroke half the time. So we're almost ready to put these handle scales on the tang, but before we do that we need to finish the front end of the handle scales because that's not going to be accessible once they're attached to the knife without really messing up the knife itself, and you simply can't do a good job of finishing those. So we're going to put our pins in here, and I should point out that this hole size in the wood and the tang is actually a F-sized drill. That's the slip fit for a 1/4 inch pin. You can use a 1/4 inch drill bit. You might have to sand down your pin stock a little bit to get it to fit nicely. A little bit of information there. We need to come back to somewhere in here, so we'll start doing that next. Also, I should point out that it's important to do these together unless you have a jig of some sort for repeatability, because you want the shape and the dimensions to be the same on each scale. I'm using 2-part epoxy, the 30-minute stuff, which has a little higher PSI than most of your 5-minute epoxies, but a 5-minute would work just fine too. You do have to be careful that you have enough time to get everything put together, which is one reason why the 30-minute is oftentimes preferable. This is a fairly simple handle construction, so I'm not too worried about it this time anyway. Doesn't really take a lot because there's not much space for the epoxy to go once everything's put together, but we're just going to put it on all surfaces here. Get our pins here and make sure those are well coated and that the holes they're going into are well coated as well. It's really the epoxy working in conjunction with the pins that gives us the handle durability that we want. You want to lightly clamp the scales, not too hard. You don't really want to squish out all the epoxy. But you're going to have some squeeze out, and the only place that really matters is right here up on the ricasso. Just like we had to finish the front end of the scales before installing them, we need to clean off this squeeze out because we can't do that after the fact, after it's cured. So make sure that you clear that all off. I like to wipe it off and then spray just a little bit of WD-40 right there. That way if any more does squeeze out, it's not really going to adhere, and it can be removed with like a brass or some kind of soft pointy tool. Softer pointy tool, not steel. You want to make sure that you let the epoxy fully cure before you do any further work on it, and that takes up to 12 hours. Alright, it's the next day and our epoxy is completely set and cured. We can now go about finishing this handle. This is my clamp setup, and as you can see I'm using a piece of leather to encase the knife blade so that the clamps don't mar it. You can also tape it up if you want, but the leather is more protective. I'm going to start by using this 60 grit, excuse me, this is a 30 grit flap disc sander. And when they're new, they're extremely aggressive. This one's getting a little worn out, but it still removes wood very effectively, and the brand new ones are super effective. They'll take this off very quickly. So that's what we're going to use to start roughing out this handle. And the first thing I'm going to do is just bring it down to where I'm just come in contact with the tang around the outside of the handle. Okay, so we have the handle shaped. We're getting very close to being finished. You'll notice that I switched to a fresh, new 60 grit flap disc sander wheel, whatever, to do this. And when they're fresh like that, they take material off very quickly, and so you don't have to put much pressure. You got to be careful that you don't create some serious divots and stuff in the handle. So just go slow, take your time. Of course, this is stuff that can be done with a rasp and a file and that kind of thing, and that's fine too. A couple things to look for when you're shaping a handle. A tendency for beginners is to leave too much material on and leave it too square and blocky. So you want to really have sort of an oval cross section, more or less, when looking at the handle from on end or on either end. And then you also want to pay attention to the front of the scales. Make sure that they are very close, or the same thickness and profile on each side. Same thing with the back. So once you have a good sort of grip there, and you can check it to see how it feels in your hand, you're ready for some sanding. Alright, we have our handle sanded down pretty smooth. You can go up to a high grit finish if you want. And we have some linseed oil on here. Got to wipe that off a little bit more to help preserve the wood. There's all kinds of different oils and wood preservatives you can use. I like to use a number of different ones. So the last thing we have to do here is put an edge on this thing and then use it. So if your heat treating went well, putting the final edge on this with a file is going to be a little bit difficult, but not impossible. So you can either do that or try to use the angle grinder, but you have to be extremely careful with that because you have a very thin edge here, and you can take off much more material than you want to, and you can easily overheat the edge by grinding and ruin it that way. So let's start with a file and put the primary bevel right here on the edge. What we have here is an edge that's about 15 thousandths thick right here. So we want to take that down to a sharp edge. And this is kind of cumbersome with the clamping system, but you can get your file in there at a bit of an angle and take off material. You want to be careful not to scratch up the blade. Just concentrate right down here on what's the primary, going to be the primary bevel here. Okay, we have the bevel mostly established with the file. You can see it's pretty rough. There's a bit of a burr. In a couple of spots you can see shininess, which means it's not sharp yet. But now we can take it to the sharpening stone and finish that in. I have a double-sided whetstone here. I typically don't use the coarse side, but since I am finishing in this primary bevel by hand, I'm going to use the coarse side, and we'll get this ready to put an actual edge on it. So I'm using WD-40 to help with the cutting action on the stone. I'm going to maintain an angle of about 15 degrees and just basically grind the knife against the stone, maintaining that angle as I move it up and down evenly up and down the edge on both sides. At this point I've worked this on the stone to where I can feel it's beginning to be sharp all the way up, but the edge is not keen yet. We can also feel a little bit of a burr running this direction. So let's flip the stone over and we'll work the edge down to a finer grit here and get closer to a shaving sharp blade. And finally I'll go ahead and sharpen it on my Arkansas stone, which is a fine stone, and it'll get us up to a nice shaving sharp edge. Alright, our knife is completed. We have done everything that we need to do to make a comfortable, durable, usable, functional blade. The only thing left to do now is to test it. A favorite test is to put this through a couple sections of 2x4 and see if it will still shave hair on the other side. So let's try that. Alright, there it is. We're through 2 sections of 2x4. Let's see what it does here. Oh yeah. Let me try to bring you in a little closer here. I could keep going through several more of those before it started feeling dull. Well, there you have it, guys. We have a great little knife. We've established that it's strong, holds an edge well, and it was inexpensive to make all the way around. So I hope you guys enjoyed this short little series and you learned something and it was helpful to you. As always, thanks for watching and we'll see you on the next video.